It's not your fault. We've all heard that phrase. Politicians say it, advertisers say it, even doctors say it. It sounds compassionate. It feels like comfort. But over time, those four words have rewritten the way we see ourselves. Because hidden inside, "it's not your fault," is another message. You have no control. In this Freedom Kitchen lecture, we're going to look at psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral science that tells us about that message and how it changes motivation, shapes our culture, and keeps families stuck in food systems that we know are failing us. We'll explore learned helplessness, locus of control, self-efficacy, choice overload, and system justification. Now, these might all be big words, but I promise you this will all make sense. We'll bring it all home to the kitchen because that's where our freedom begins and ends. Let's start with the science of helplessness. In the late 1960s, psychologist Martin Seligman made a surprising discovery. He exposed animals to a sound followed by a mild, unavoidable shock. Later, even when an escape route was available, they didn't move. They had learned that nothing they did mattered. He called it learned helplessness. A decade later, Seligman, Abramson, and Teasdale reframed this theory. Helplessness doesn't come from failure itself. It comes from expectation that our actions and our outcomes are not connected. Once that expectation sets in, motivation disappears. Fast forward to 2016. Seligman, along with neuroscientist Stephen Mayer, showed that our brains have a control switch in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. When we believe we can act, that area quiets stress signals from the limbic system. When we believe we can't, stress hormones surge and the brain literally shuts down trying. So biologically, believing we can act is protective. Believing we can't act is paralyzing. Now think about the world that we live in. We're told food is confusing, labels are contradictory, experts disagree. We're told obesity, chronic disease, and environmental toxins are complicated and not your fault. Over time, our brains adopt the same rule that those laboratory animals learn. Nothing I do makes a difference. At the moment we believe that, we stop trying. You can see it in the grocery aisle. A parent turns the box, reads zero trans fat, natural flavors, gluten-friendly, sighs, and just tosses it in the cart. It's not laziness. It's learned helplessness disguised as convenience. Now, let's also address locus of control and self-efficacy. Psychologist Julian Rotter describes something called locus of control, an internal compass that asks, do I believe outcomes come from my own actions or from external forces? People with an internal locus of control tend to act, experiment, and persist. Those with an external locus tend to wait for permission or rescue. In the 1960s, most Americans had a strong internal locus. They fixed their cars, grew their gardens, and cooked meals from scratch. Over time, that has shifted. Food, medicine, education all became professionalized. We were told, trust the experts, ask your doctor, see if the FDA has approved that. Each of these phrases chipped away at our internal control and replaced it with external dependence. Albert Bandura took it further with his theory of self-efficacy. The belief in one's capability to execute a task. Across thousands of studies, self-efficacy predicts who follows through on exercise, diet, quitting smoking, or learning a new skill. When someone believes I can figure this out, the brain releases dopamine before the result. The anticipation of mastery fuels the motivation. When they believe they can't, the dopamine shuts off. So every time an ad says, let us do it for you, or you don't have time to cook, it's not just selling a product, it's lowering your self-efficacy. Cooking then is about more than just food. It's a neurological retraining of control. When you measure flour, stir batter, taste, and adjust the recipe, you see the cause and effect loop that your nervous system actually craves. That loop tells the prefrontal cortex, I act and something changes. This is the opposite of helplessness. So then we have confusion as control and choice overload. The year 2000, researchers set up a jam tasting table in a California market. When shoppers saw 24 flavors, only 3% of them bought. When they saw 6 flavors, 30% of them bought. That's 10 times more. Too much choice produced paralysis. This phenomenon, choice overload, has been replicated in everything from retirement plans to dating apps. The more options, the less action. Now apply that to the modern food landscape. 38,000 items in an average supermarket, hundreds of diet philosophies, low-fat, high-fat, plant-based, paleo, fortified, natural. We mistake variety for freedom. But abundance without clarity feels like chaos. Neuroscientists call it decision fatigue. The brain's glucose supply for decision making gets depleted. And when that happens, we default to the easiest available choice, usually the one engineered for craving. So when parents say, I'll just grab whatever, that isn't failure. It's neuroeconomics doing exactly what it was designed to do under overload. Once again, the system benefits from our exhaustion. Confusion becomes a tool of control. So why don't we revolt? Why, when we learn that the same corporation selling cereal once sold cigarettes, do we still fill our pantries with their brands? Well, the phrase system justification theory was coined by a couple psychologists. It says that people defend existing systems, even unjust systems, because believing the world is fair feels safer than believing it's rigged. That explains the phrase that you hear so often. If it were really that bad, the government wouldn't allow it. I mean, I think I used to feel the same way. System justification creates cognitive ease. It soothes anxiety with trust, but it also protects the very systems that create harm. When trans fat was banned in 2015, then 2018, and then again in 2021, the headlines felt reassuring. Yet the fine print allowed 0.49 grams per serving, meaning a product could legally claim zero trans fat. That's not safety, that's semantics. And still, many people defended it. At least they're trying. That's system justification at work. Corporations know this reflex. That's why ad campaigns now use the language of empathy. We hear you. We care. We're changing. Even when nothing changes. Every time they say it's not your fault, that statement acts like a release valve, venting public frustration so the machine can just keep running. You may remember from my earlier video, The Recipe for Independence, that in the 1980s, tobacco giants quietly bought food companies. R.J. Reynolds bought Nabisco and Philip Morris bought Kraft and General Foods. They imported their business model to make the food products addictive, to advertise relentlessly, to make it affordable and accessible, and to target the youngest age possible. In 2019, the National Institutes of Health published a controlled feeding study led by Kevin Hall. Participants eating ultra-processed diets consumed about 500 extra calories per day without realizing it, simply because the foods, they're engineered to be highly palatable and engineered for speed. Addiction science tells us that repeated dopamine spikes downregulate receptors. The more stimulation, the less sensitivity, and the more we need. That's tolerance. Combine that chemistry with the helpless messaging, and you get a perfect trap. The same system that creates the stress also sells the relief. Food becomes both the problem and the pacifier. So again, when people hear, it's not your fault, the brain hears you have no way out. But there is a way out, and it begins with reestablishing real cause and effect between effort and outcome, seed and soil, action and result, cooking and eating. Let's put these pieces together. Learned helplessness shows how repeated, uncontrollable outcomes train passivity. Locus of control and self-efficacy show how belief in agency restores motivation. Choice overload explains why abundance breeds paralysis. And system justification shows us why we defend what harms us. The addictive food model shows us an industry that leverages all of this to maintain control. The result is a population that feels overwhelmed, guilty, and powerless. A society that equates convenience with survival. But neuroscience offers hope. The brain's control circuits are plastic. Every act of intentional creation, especially those with an immediate feedback, strengthens the network that inhibits helplessness. That can be gardening, repairing, teaching, and yes, cooking. When we chop vegetables, mix dough, taste, and adjust our recipe, and then feed others, we experience visible evidence that our effort matters. That single experience contradicts every cultural message of helplessness. So the kitchen becomes more than a place to eat. It becomes a laboratory for agency. The larger mission of Freedom Kitchen is to help families restore that connection between action and outcome, cause and consequence, responsibility and freedom. Because when we reclaim those connections in the kitchen, we begin to reclaim them in our health, in our community, and in our culture. They told us it's not our fault. Maybe it wasn't. But freedom doesn't begin with blame. It begins with responsibility. So ask yourself, where have I handed over control because it felt too complex? I understand the layers of confusion, and that's why I created this channel. As a health coach, I found if I could help someone take responsibility and agency in their life, it had a positive impact on their health, which is how I went from teaching and lecturing to leading cooking classes. Because the small act of getting back in your kitchen reminds you that you can shape your outcomes. That's the real recipe for independence. I would love for you to drop me a comment and tell me what you gleaned from this video. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.